Okay, guys, I don't have I guess the official name for this masterclass, I'll put air quotes on that because it just sounds so intense. The official name for this masterclass is, I want to just call it Mastering Your Emotions, because the other stuff we wrote on the different posts we put out, just were long and wordy, and I don't know that I want to say that ever again in my life. So welcome to the Mastering Your Emotions Masterclass. Again, the term masterclass feels a little intense. I don't know that I want it to be that aggressive. I'm gonna take these off. But basically my heart and vision behind doing this was I wanted to just jump on here and talk about emotions. I know that we're all emotional people, right? We're all emotional people, and not all of us have the best skills, training, experience, etc. on managing those emotions. And so we then make choices, decisions, we contribute in certain ways that don't necessarily produce the most beneficial outcomes for us or for the people around us. I know that I run into that a lot. So just a quick little intro for those of you who are watching this and maybe don't know me. My name is Mike Mayashiro. I'm assuming you know me or you wouldn't be on here, right? I have my hand in several pots. I love entrepreneurship and business. I love teaching. I love ministry. I love Jesus. And so I do things in all these arenas. But one of the things I focus on a lot is mentorship, discipleship, pastoring, counseling, coaching, that kind of stuff. I have a huge value for helping people reorient their systems, like the things going on in their soul, and helping them, be successful in how they navigate the world they live in and the way they choose to participate in and contribute to all that stuff. All right, so all I have to say, you guys, I've been a very emotional person my whole life. And I don't say that lightly. I think we all are actually very emotional people. Some people just aren't as aware of their emotions, aren't as in tune, aren't as honest maybe. But every single one of us is an emotional creature, okay? So I guess the difference that might set me apart from other people might be that I'm willing to admit that. We are all emotional people, and we all express those emotions in one way or another. It might not come out as intentional expression, but we do express emotions in ways that maybe we're just not conscious of. So all that to say, the whole point of tonight was, or today or this morning or wherever you are, it was I wanted to just go over some mechanics on what it looks like to govern yourself from the inside out, so that the way you participate in relationship especially can start producing a lot better results for you and for the people that you do life with. So I'm gonna pop over to some notes here so you guys, we stay on track. And I also got some questions from people on Instagram last night of things that they wanted me to answer during this thing. I'm not gonna answer all of them, but I have picked a few that I would like to touch on. So those will come up as well. So first of all, just to get us started, you guys, I want to draw a picture. I'm going to draw a tree, right? And then there are branches, and then this tree is going to be like a giant broccoli, right? That's a tree. And then on this tree, we're going to have this fruit produced, right? These balls represent fruit. And let's say this is a person. The fruit, these balls up here, are going to represent emotion, okay? So your emotions pop out as fruit from your life, but the emotions themselves are not contained within just this fruit. The emotions are coming from the root, the nature of the tree, what you are, where it's pulling from. Your emotions are never complete unto themselves. They're never just there by themselves. They always come from somewhere, okay? So our emotions are triggered, and the word triggered is maybe not the best word. Our emotions are caused, come from our judgments and our expectations. And I want to make a distinction on both of those. So I'm going to write judgments right here. Hopefully this is legible to you guys from where you're sitting. And then write expectations down here, okay? And I want to contrast these two things by and large. So I've got judgments and I've got expectations contrasted on this, right? Judgments are going to be, I'm going to categorize them as being longer term and broader scoped. So your judgments are going to be comprised of decisions you've made about the world. Obviously, you're taught a lot of these, you're handed them, you're culturized, you're socialized. There's a lot of different influences that come into forming your judgments, but you're the one who decides this stuff. Nobody else decides this for you, right? So we decide what our judgments are comprised of. And so you make judgments about everything, about gravity, about light, about food, about other people, about love, intimacy, pain. Like, we make judgments about all of these things. And then these judgments produce all kinds of other chain reactions in our being, namely emotions that we experience, okay? So judgments I'm going to categorize as being longer term and broader scoped, okay? So bigger picture. An example of a judgment, this is going to be a weird one, but let's say someone makes a judgment about men and they just decide, and we can call this being prejudice or sexist or whatever, but a judgment that might be made about men is like, let's say someone decides that they believe, whether they meant to do this or not, they believe that all men are selfish. For whatever reason, whether it's they're all just genetically born that way, it's built into their makeup, or if all men just, at least in our cultural mechanism, are designed, raised up, reared, encouraged to be self-seeking. Let's say that's a judgment that someone made about the male gender. That would be something that you would then probably hold longer term and be broader scoped about, right? It's about the world you live in and hitting any person that registers on that scale. And so as that judgment is in your lens, you are going to experience men choosing things, doing things, not doing things, and you're probably going to like interpret those expressions according to that judgment. So, oh, look how this guy was selfish here, and look at the selfishness in this dude over here. And then that judgment starts to produce evidence, you know, of itself. It's self-validating, like, yep, that guy's selfish in this way, and blah, blah, blah. And oh my gosh, it's true, men are selfish. And you don't necessarily notice all the self-sacrificial, you know, generous ways that men participate as well. It's just there's a bias there. My point in this is just trying to give you an example of what a judgment would look like as I'm going to contrast it from an expectation. Okay. So expectations are going to be shorter term and more specific to circumstances, events, relationships, etc. Expectations are going to be more minute and like unique and like customized, if you will. So maybe I have a judgment that all men are selfish, or maybe all women are, whatever the label might be, right? An expectation might be, my wife, my husband, my friend, my neighbor, my sister, whomever, that specific individual in my world is going to be like this, or is this way, or owes this to me. We set these judgmental expectations on relationships, good or bad, in a more specific scenario, right? Or maybe a shorter term situation. So maybe your judgment on like going to a certain like function at your kid's elementary school, right? Maybe you're going to like a basketball game that fifth graders are playing at. You're going to put some expectations on your experience there, right? You're going into that experience with some expectations already in place. I'm going to have to talk to some other parents. This game's going to go for about 45 minutes. I'm probably going to get bored. You're having these expectations happening before you even get to the gymnasium, right? This is normal for us. We do this all the time. We're constantly anticipating what's going to happen and how to prepare ourselves, right? Whether we mean to be doing it or not, that happens. So judgments are going to be broader termed, right? And broader scoped, longer termed. Expectations are going to be shorter termed, more specific to circumstance or relationship. Okay, I want to make those two distinctions, and these both produce emotions in us. Okay, none of us are just angry by nature. None of us are joyful by nature. We have these emotions that show up from certain, we might have some predisposed mechanisms in our personality that might make certain emotions more accessible or more frequent in our experience. But by and large, our emotions are going to be triggered, are going to be produced from the judgments and the expectations that we're walking around with that are, irrespective of anybody else. It's just based on the things we've decided are true. Okay. And so based on the judgments and expectations established in us, when something is, when an expectation is unmet or met, we will have an emotional reaction to it. If someone does something that they're supposed to do in your relationship that pays tribute to what you think is good or right or appropriate, you're going to feel good about that. You're going to feel respected. You're going to feel honored. You're going to feel trusted. You're going to have these positive emotions according to that person meeting the expectation that you had, right? If someone does something that you weren't expecting or that's inappropriate for what you do expect, then you're going to have some negative emotions about that, right? So let's say you're going to dinner with a friend and they chew loudly with their mouth open and talk with their mouth full, and they spit out a couple times and they don't know they're doing it. You probably on the other end of that experience aren't having a great time witnessing that, and you might have some emotions about that. You might feel like, what is wrong with this person? I don't want to be here. This is awkward. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to be seen with this person in public. I don't know. You're having an emotional response. You're not in danger. They're not like harming you. This isn't like a needed situation. You're having an emotional response according to the judgment that you brought to that table, the expectations of what's set for this, right? And so based on that person violating the expectation, you then have an emotional response. And obviously someone eating or speaking with their mouth full, not that big of a deal. We don't have a strong, actually that's not true. Some of us have very strong emotional responses to people, being very loud with their chewing. I'm not necessarily one of those people, but I have some people in my life whom I'm close to who feel very strongly about that. They have an emotional reaction to how people eat, which sounds kind of extreme, but this happens all the time based on judgments and expectations. Okay, so I'm hoping that that's clicking and making sense. As these two things are oriented in a certain way, that is what's going to cause the emotions to show up. Okay, and so we had a question. We had a new mom ask, how can an extrovert thrive in a situation with a huge decrease in adult interaction time, right? Because she's a new mother, she has kids, and just doesn't, or she has a child now and doesn't get to be around other people socially like she used to be. And she's an extrovert. She's like, how do I thrive in the situation? One thing I'm going to say to that, not to say that I'm an expert on that. I've never had a child. I don't know what that's like on some level. I can imagine, and here's what I would say to that. First of all, new mom is going to want to shift some of her expectations on what a day-to-day life in her world now is going to look like. Not just kind of bracing herself or reacting to things, but she can powerfully come into the realm of her own expectations of her life, of her schedule, of her routine, of her day-to-day, her relationships. She can make some intentional expectations about what that is going to look like, whether she's going to react to things she feels are inevitable, or she's going to intentionally build and create structure to support what she wants to experience. Either way, she has expectations that are going to fire off. She can be intentional about that, or they can just be a byproduct of her judgments. But what I would say by and large is, if I'm an extrovert and I have a child and I no longer get to be as social as I used to be, I'm going to spend some time investing in shifting my expectations from what used to be normal to what will now need to be normal based on the priorities that I've embraced, right? So she can shift those expectations and all of a sudden decide, I'm not going to have my girl night every week anymore. It's just not going to happen. The girls and I'm not going to be getting together with them. Or if I am, it's going to look like this now. She can intentionally go through the shifting of that expectation. As that shifts, the emotions that pop up from her experience will reflect the nature of what she's put on her experiences and how aligned they are with the actual outcome of those things. So we have control over this, you guys. That's one of the most beautiful things about this, is we have control over our judgments and our expectations. Some of us don't feel like we do. Some of us feel like we're victims to this, or like this got decided for us or whatever. And I would just say to you, or to those people, that that's simply ignorance talking. These things didn't form without your consent. You said yes to all this stuff. I'm not saying you didn't have help. We all have help. We all make these judgments and expectations based on a lot of data. But at the end of the day, by and large, we're the ones who slam the gavel at the end. We're the ones who decide, okay, this is what's true. We decide what's true in our world all the time. If what we decide is true lines up with what's actually true, our emotions are going to thrive and it'd be awesome. If we decide something's true and it conflicts or contradicts with what actually is true with reality, then our emotions are going to be frustrated, exhausting, difficult, negative, right? Because of the misalignment. So what I'd like to propose is, you guys, negative emotions are going to be coming from your expectations or your judgments not being met from reality when there's a disconnect, okay? And so we have control over this. We don't have control over our emotions. We have control over our judgments and expectations. As we shift and intentionally manage these things, our emotions will be a reward or a cost to what was established here. I'm hoping that's making sense. And in this place, you guys, another thing you want to understand about emotions, I think I've said this a few times out there, but emotions are not good or bad. Emotions aren't bad, I'll say that. Emotions are good. I actually really like emotions. I'm so grateful for my emotions and that I'm an emotional person. I'm grateful for that. But emotions in and of themselves aren't necessarily supposed to be good or bad. They're indicative, okay? So your emotions are actually signals of your judgments and expectations being met or unmet, okay? Your emotions are not you. Your emotions do not reflect who you are. Your emotions reflect the nature of your judgments and expectations being met or not met in your life, okay? They're simply there to let you know that your expectations are lined up, or that you expected something that isn't happening, or what you expected, you need to change that, whether it's change the expectation or change the result, if you can, right? The emotions are simply there to validate and affirm or communicate a disconnect, a discrepancy in that interplay. Okay, so we don't want to resist or reject any of our emotions. What we want to do is understand them. I want you guys to think of your emotions. I'm going to put a line here. Remember, these are emotions. We want to think of our emotions. Oops. I'm going to get rid of that. Oh my. As messengers. And I cannot spell right now. That's an S. We want to think of our emotions as messengers, okay? So your emotions, when they fire off, when they're starting to represent themselves, they're not there to ruin your life, to get in the way, to make things difficult. They're there to communicate. They're there to inform you, to keep you apprised of what's happening in your world, okay? And those of us who don't understand this economy experience our negative emotions and react to that stuff. We do whatever we can to shut them down, to avoid them, to fix them, to punish other people because of them or whatever. But at the end of the day, the whole ecosystem is coming from what we've decided is true and should happen or shouldn't happen or whatever. Okay, so when you experience your emotions, what you want to do, if this is not a normal practice for you, is first immediately seek to understand the emotion. And now growing up as a logical, rational person who's also emotional, and those things are not mutually exclusive, I learned at a pretty young age to question my emotions because I knew that I felt emotions that were strong and were pushing me in a direction that wasn't going to be constructive or beneficial to me or people around me. I logically could observe that and was able to disconnect myself from the emotions that I was experiencing for the most part. And I then could judge and assess. Like, let's say I popped an emotion off my tree and I'm like, okay, what is this thing made out of? Where did it come from? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? How did it get here? I could actually separate myself from the emotion, analyze it, and decide, is this thing right? Is this thing true? Is it good? Or is this thing the other stuff? Is this not true? Is this emotion based on something that's not real? Am I reacting to something because of my own issues, not because of what's really going on, right? You always want to be able to tell the difference on that. So understand that your emotions are not a reflection of who you are. They are simply a result, a symptom of what you decided is true, meeting what actually took place, okay? And so when that happens, then we should be able to take a step back from the experience of emotion and be able to rationally, logically assess or analyze what that emotion is made out of, where did it come from, what do we want to do with it? Because the emotion is not seated on our brain telling us what to do. The emotion is out here as a visitor, a messenger communicating something to me as the king of my kingdom, and I get to decide, do I believe this messenger or not? Is this messenger helping me or not? So is this warning that's coming actually true based on reality, something's really going on, and then should I heed the warning? Or is this thing not true? Is it based on some falsehood that's going on in my kingdom? Do I need to send this messenger away? I don't know. It's based on your ability to rationally analyze the thing, right? So we want to be able to put that into practice. Some people might feel like, you know what, I'm a very emotional being. I can't do what you're describing. You might be able to do that, but I can't. And to that, I would say, I disagree. That's not true. The reason I can do that, readily today without having to put a ton of energy into it is because I've done it a lot. And I think any person who's emotionally intelligent and mature in this area would say they weren't born this way. It wasn't a natural propensity of theirs. It was a practice that they developed over time, over repetition. You do this enough, pretty soon you become competent and it's less taxing. That's true of anything. But to our encouragement, it's also true in the emotional category. None of us are slaves to our emotion. One of the fruits of God, one of the results or the symptoms of God's spirit being in us is that we are in control of ourselves, meaning that other forces, external factors, our own emotions are not just dragging us around. We are actually in control of us. And from that place of empowerment and clarity, we then get to make intentional choices about what does show up, okay? And the more we practice this and the better we get at it, the more we learn like what this thing is, and the more these emotions that show up become trustworthy, the more they demonstrate what's actually true to us. To the point where, and I discovered this about 5 years ago, this was a shocking discovery for me, and it was so brilliant and exciting and helpful, but profound and not something that I was told would happen. As I continued to practice self-awareness and emotional intelligence and continuing to develop my relationship with my emotions and learning how to partner with them and embrace them rather than let that be a tumultuous, negative experience, I started finding that my anger, my offense, my frustration in a moment actually became a tool in the hand of God, if you will. Okay, that sounds kind of extreme. It became a constructive tool to actually bring benefit and value to my environment, to other people even, because my justice meter, my expectations and judgments were going up to the point where something was violating what I expected should happen. And often my expectations, because of the work that I'd done in adjusting these accordingly, were connected to the truth, lined up with the truth. So what I expected should happen or would take place, if that was violated, it was easy for me to recognize the anger or the offense or the hurt or whatever. When it came, it became a pretty common occurrence that when I felt that, it's because something's wrong, not because I'm emotionally out of control. That wasn't true early on in my life, but as I continued to practice honing my judgments and expectations and lining them up with the truth, then the emotions that showed up in my life, whether they were good or bad, were always beneficial. You guys, your emotions are there to help. They're there to assist you. We don't want to get mad at our eyes just because we saw something ugly, something gross, something unsightly. We don't want to gouge our eyes out because we saw stuff we didn't want to see. We're grateful we can see, even though that includes seeing things we don't want to, right? In the same way, we want to be grateful to feel what we can feel, even if the feeling isn't fun. We want to be able to feel that, right? Because it helps us know what's happening with our judgments. All right, so I'm hoping that's making sense. So we had a question: what do you do when negative emotions don't lift, even after forgiving, breaking agreement, etc.? That's a great question. So we've tried to face an emotion that we don't like, or that we feel guilty for, or that we know we shouldn't be feeling, or it's not appropriate, or whatever, we've done all the things we can. One of the things that I like to do, or that I found to be super helpful when I can't seem to get the emotion to lift, is I've realized, so understand this is not something that I do. It's something that is a result of a practice, a lifestyle choice, if you will, a mindset even. My emotions aren't who I am. My emotions don't reflect my actual mood, okay? My emotions reflect my judgments or expectations being met or unmet, right? And so from that place, I'm not being pushed around by my emotions. And if that actually gets shifted accordingly, then me having a negative emotional experience is not unbearable. I'm not sitting under that frustrated, impatient, trying to get away. I'm mostly aware that that's there. And if I don't know why, I can sit there and ask questions, poke, I can investigate, I can figure out where it's coming from. But even if I don't find the answer, I know that emotion isn't going to ruin my life. I know that emotion does not define who I am or what's happening to me even. That emotion is simply communicating to me something that's off. Sometimes I don't actually figure it out. But at this point in my life, I don't know that I need to figure out every emotion that I feel. I experience a lot of emotions on a regular basis. I interact with a lot of people on a regular basis. And I have a lot of contribution I'm meant to bring to lots of circles that I'm in. If I had to process and face every emotion I felt, I wouldn't really get much stuff done. I would be just a basket case processing all these messengers and listening to them all the time. Not super helpful. Some emotions obviously are important because they're connected to certain things that need to be addressed, and other ones are coming from things that maybe aren't that big of a deal. And maybe I'm right in feeling that this isn't awesome, but I don't need to necessarily address that. We learn how to make that distinction, how to make those judgment calls over time through experience in recognizing which is most beneficial to address and which we should be letting go. So if I'm sitting under a negative emotion and I can't get rid of it, I'm actually going to be okay. So I guess what I'm saying to this person is, just because you're sitting in a negative emotion doesn't mean it needs to go away. It doesn't mean you need to fix it, because it's not necessarily a problem. It is communicating something, and that's something that you want to be aware of. A lot of people treat their emotions like something they have to fix or overcome or survive even. And I'm like, that's so sad, because your emotions are so beneficial. They're so helpful. It means that your synaptic firings are working, like you're connected. That's a good thing. So just because the message is negative doesn't mean that you're negative. It doesn't mean that the circumstance itself is necessarily even negative. It means that something's happening that needs to be addressed, okay? And so if I'm sitting under a negative emotion, I'm not going to beat myself up over that. I'm going to be aware of it. I'm going to do what I can to face it. If I can't find the solution or the answer, I'm going to just let it sit there, and I'll move on with my life. And I won't let that emotion just infiltrate every other moment I have after that. And at some point, either the thing is going to be exposed to me, I will understand it, or it'll go away because it got resolved. And either way, I'm okay. If you treat your emotion like it's a problem that you have to face, then all of a sudden that thing starts to run your life. It starts to push you around. It starts to steal from all these other moments you would have had. Some of us might be thinking, okay, well, if I ignore an emotion that I'm feeling, doesn't it mean then, or won't I feel like I'm lying to other people? I know I went through that for a while where, I was feeling offended or hurt or angry, and then I had to go into another situation with other people that had nothing to do with what I experienced. And for me to not say anything about that felt like I was not honestly or authentically representing myself to the new environment, right? But that doesn't necessarily need to go to everybody else. It doesn't need to be put on other people, and it doesn't necessarily need to be addressed right away. I would say it's an immature person who needs their emotions to be sorted every time they feel a strong one. I've noticed certain people in my world who, if they have a strong negative emotion because of whatever, a judgment or expectation not being met, they feel hurt, they feel like they did something wrong or whatever, they can't move on. They can't let it go. They can't actually like function in other areas until they address the thing. And to them, they think they're being responsible and helpful and honest. And I think that their motive or their intention is pure. But at the end of the day, what's actually happening there is they're letting this emotion dictate their life rather than allowing that message to come in and to inform them on how they want to respond to their environment. So I want to get into confrontation real quick, you guys. One of the biggest things that I've learned in relationships that has been so constructive and life-changing and also very neglected by the majority of our population is this word confrontation. A lot of people don't like it. I mean, I don't necessarily like it. I have a positive relationship with confrontation at this point in my life. I appreciate confrontation. I respect it. I know its value and its significance and its power. But a lot of us like to avoid confrontation because we associate confrontation with conflict or with rejection or with punishment or with me doing something I'm going to feel guilty for later or with me being punished or whatever, right? And that's not all synonymous with confrontation. It's just the byproduct of people confronting out of an immature or compromised state. Confrontation in and of itself is such an essential part of having a healthy, functional relationship with anyone, whether it's your spouse, your kids, your friends, your coworkers, the people at Chipotle. Like, if you need to confront, like, hey, can I get a little more meat on that? Hey, would you mind taking that thing off? I didn't ask for that. Like, that's a confrontation, right? Which, and we make this such a big deal. It's so dramatic and out of control. But it's like, no, this is happening all the time. It's necessary for us to be able to communicate and go in a direction together. Why wouldn't we do this in the relationships that are most important to us? It's essential that we're able to confront, okay? So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on confrontation, because I have that in resources in other places. By the way, if you guys want to check out resources that I have, you can go to MikeMaestro.com. We've got several different products that I've created over there in areas like this. But anyway, in the confrontation piece, what we want to do with the confrontation is, the reason we're doing that is because we want to address a break in a judgment or an expectation that we had in a relationship, especially because that's going to be producing emotions in us, right? So a lot of you guys, I think a lot of you are on here because you saw my Facebook post or my Instagram post or whatever of me sharing that story about a buddy of mine who told me I couldn't do a certain lift because of my body type. And I was like, what? And I took it all like personally. I got offended. I'm like, oh, he thinks that I'm weak and I'm like this rail, and because I've been skinny my whole life, right? And so it was hitting my manly button or my masculinity button, like kind of not threatening, but like questioning, like, am I actually a man in this guy's eyes, right? So I got all offended. My ego's bruised. I'm like, oh. And so in that, I knew that I needed to address the thing, because if I didn't say something, then I would actually start shrinking away from this relationship. I'd start like making space for there to be distance here. I didn't want to be connected to him. I was mad. I was hurt. I'm like offended. I would defend myself against his input. And that's just not a great spot to be in if you actually want to have a functioning, authentic relationship with someone. And so I knew, because of the value that this person held to me, I needed to confess this stupid thing that I was feeling, this offense that I had. And I mostly felt embarrassed. What I want you guys to understand in relationships is oftentimes confrontation is actually confession. It's a confession. Like, I just want to admit to you that I feel this way, that when this thing happened, this is how it hit me. This is what happened to me, right? And so I want to kind of set the word confrontation free from some negative, connotations and borders it's had to live within. Let's set it free. Confrontation is so beautiful and powerful. And sometimes it's not necessarily us telling someone that they're wrong. It might not be like, hey, I want to confront this situation and let you know that I'm feeling this way, right? And so in the example that I gave on social media, the thing that I shared was a confession. That confrontation I had, like, hey, can we talk? Was me simply like confessing that I felt this way about what he had said. And I asked questions like, what did you mean by that? Where were you coming from? And the end of that story was like, he was like, oh, dude, I didn't mean that at all. Like, that was nowhere in what I was thinking. I was like, yeah. So then I got to bring up some past hurts of past things that I had felt in that area and whatever, and which was embarrassing, but also it was vulnerable. And as I got to share that stuff, it actually allowed us to be closer in our relationship and build a lot more of a connection there, which was awesome. And in the long run, it was actually way more rewarding than if that moment had never happened in the first place, okay? Excuse me. So whenever you guys feel anger, or you feel hurt, or you feel offended, or things like that in a connection with someone, that emotion needs to be exposed in order for it to be sterilized. You can't strip the poison or the hot intensity from those emotions without exposing them. Ephesians 5:13, I'm going to quote the Bible here. Anything exposed by the light becomes visible, and anything that's visible is light. And when you understand the dynamic of light in the spirit world and how it affects the rest of reality, you realize that things that get exposed within the intention of being known, right, it's based on your motive and your intention, not based on the act. So in anything that matters, it's always based on the spirit behind it, not the actual act itself. Okay, so the light is actually based on motive and intent. So it's not necessarily a physical location or a domain necessarily, because it is in some ways, but in another way, it's based on your intention, your motive toward reality and toward relationship. So when we expose, hey, I feel this way, hey, that hurt my feelings, hey, I'm mad about this, it actually strips that emotion that we're experiencing, that messenger that's coming to us to tell us hey, they did something that's not right. That's a problem. We have to address it. When you embrace that and you share it instead of harboring it and let it become this festering, poisonous defense thing that you're going to use to punish and accuse somebody, when you expose that intentionally with the heart of, I want you to know this so we can move forward together. I don't want to abandon what we have here because of what happened to me based on what you did or whatever. When that happens, that emotion stops being intense and hot and frantic, and it starts to become a little more clarifying and informative, and it starts to nudge you in a direction that's actually life-giving and helpful. And I have gotten so much personal growth and breakthrough from admitting my own negative emotions to people that I was attributing that to, because I got feedback from them. I got to hear where they were coming from. Sometimes I was right, and then they got to clean up their mess, but I got to watch them care about our connection outside of me, and I was like, whoa. And I learned a lot about other people and about the nature of connection in those experiences because I brought that stuff out, right? And so from that, you guys, what we want to understand is when you expose that stuff, that's when the nastiness gets stripped off of it and it becomes constructive, even if it is painful. So when we do that, one of the things you want to understand is in a relationship between two people, okay, I'm going to erase the emotion tree. This is going to go away. And we're going to talk about connection now. And I want to give you some visuals on this to help you kind of understand some dynamics that are going on. And what I want to also throw out as a disclaimer right now is, you guys, this is Mike's opinion. Everything I'm about to teach you is from my travels, my experiences, my journey, my story, my observations, and notes, okay? So I'm not basing this off any textbook or any psychology that I've learned. This is based on my observation and experience with people. We've got you. So I'm going to put you on the left, right? And then we've got another person over here, your friend, your spouse, your whomever, your whatever. We got two people who've come together and now they have a relationship. When a relationship forms, there's this thing in the middle between us called a connection. Connection is what exists in the spirit between us, okay? We call this in English, in the natural, a relationship. But underneath the beautiful, fluffy, fleshy mask of a relationship is this energetic bond between two human beings that didn't exist before them and won't exist after them. Anytime you become friends with anybody, you create something that's never existed before. We are that unique. We are that powerful. Absolutely. We are an expression of the multifaceted creativity of God. Okay. And so, I'm noticing some questions on here. I will check those later, you guys. All right. When this connection is established, this thing starts to communicate on its own. And if you understand this thing correctly, it actually causes your participation in the relationship to become a lot easier. Your burden, your participation, your responsibility on your end, it becomes a lot lighter. When Jesus says, come to me, all you who are heavy, burdened, who are weary, right? I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. You are supposed to experience a lightness and an ease in life, and especially in your relationships. When things are hard, when you're fighting for stuff, when you're really just sacrificing to make this thing work, I'd like to propose that you're actually working way too hard on something that probably shouldn't be turning out the way that it is. I'm not saying relationships don't take work, that they're not sacrificial. You don't have to adjust or compromise. Of course you do. That's all true. But that labor, our end of that relationship, those things should come out of delight and pleasure and willful jubilance, not obligation or like begrudging requirement. You know what I mean? Okay. So in this, when this connection is established, this thing actually can function and serve both of you apart from either of you. And I don't want to get super crazy on this. I just want to kind of propose a couple of things to help you guys shift some of the way that you perceive how to navigate relationships and what is constructive and beneficial here. And as a connection situation, this connection exists outside of either of us, okay? And if we care for this thing, if we're intentional with it, and if we allow our expectations and our judgments to care for this and prioritize it, rather than only caring for and prioritizing me, then this connection actually starts to serve, protect, and empower me. You guys, when Jesus says it's more blessed to give than to receive, that is absolutely fact. That is true. He's not saying that to make you a good person, to make you behave, to make you care about other people. He's not saying that so that we could get some great Christmas cards out. He's saying that because that's actually how the real world works. When you give, when your intention and your motive is to serve and contribute, then the things outside of you, and I'm talking about even this connection with your whoever the other person is, that connection will defend you in their mind. It will serve you. It will prioritize you. It will bring favor to you. That connection is part of what causes them to bring things to you and offer things to you and be generous toward you and prefer you over others around them, not out of manipulation, not out of like twisting, but out of a beautiful song that comes from this God-designed function between creative, powerful sons and daughters of Him. Like, it's supposed to do that. So when we take care of this person, when we prioritize them, when we honor them, when we celebrate them, the connection, the nature of it, which is vibing a frequency in the spirit, starts to support and empower us. It's beautiful, okay? And so when we talk about emotions and the way they might potentially be sabotaging our relationships, when we cause those things to come under the intention of love, trust, hope, honor, connection, love, all the things, those beautiful, right, good things, then the nature of this relationship becomes constructive and beautiful and rewarding. And there's nothing like it. You guys, like, you can build your own empire. You can become famous. You can have tons of money. You can do all the things in the world to feel like you're winning. But when you have a friend, a spouse, a family member, whoever, when you have a relationship with another person that's legitimately seated in truth and love, and there's honor and there's camaraderie and there's preferential treatment, that thing is a gift you cannot buy. You can only build this. You can't purchase it. You can't manufacture it. You can't borrow it. You can't buy it from someone else. You have to invest. And you can't invest money. You have to invest your heart. And so this thing becomes a very beautiful, rewarding experience when you take care of it and you come at it with the right spirit. Okay? So, in every relationship, you guys, this thing is the priority. The connection is the priority. If at some point, like, let's say you guys are going to go somewhere and do something together, or you're working together or whatever, and something happens and the connection, for whatever reason, gets severed. I know severed sounds too strong and too permanent, so maybe severed is not the right word. Let's say a disconnection takes place. Something hits against the thing that bonds you, and you're like, oh, I don't feel super connected to them anymore. I don't feel like I'm on the same page with them. I don't feel like we see each other right now. And it's temporary, right? But let's say it happens. You don't want to ignore that. We don't want to just push past the disconnect and force ourselves to do the task. Before the task gets done, you probably want to stop what you're doing and address the disconnect. And what that looks like for me when I want to address a disconnect is I ask a lot of questions. And I would encourage everyone who has a relationship with another person and then a disconnection happens, ask questions. You know what I mean? Because a lot of us don't actually know what's going on until we investigate, until we invite further clarity and understanding. So you first want to, when it comes to prioritizing connection, you first want to investigate and find out what was missing, and then bring it, cover it, provide it, so the connection can be established again. And then once that's there, move on toward the task or the party or the whatever, right? And you know those married couples or even dating couples or whatever, they get in a fight right before a party or a social event or whatever, and then they show up and they're both kind of like, and they're putting their fake social smiles on. They're trying to just kind of get through it because they don't want to be messy and drag everybody out and whatever. I'm like, hey, the couples should probably pull over and have the chat, knock it out, like get connected again first before they show up at the party. Because when that thing's in place, when you show up, you get to give so much more of yourself than dragging around the cost and the weight of disconnection, especially with someone that's important to you. So I know this can be really inconvenient. It can feel really unrealistic to care for that, especially if one of the party members is dysfunctional. But this, by and large, is the priority and should be taken care of before any other thing gets looked after, okay? We want to prioritize that. When you feel strong emotion toward the other person, for whatever reason, let's say it's negative, and you want to express that, we have three things we want to avoid at all costs when we are addressing a disconnect with someone we care about because of negative emotion. You want to avoid accusation. That's a T. You want to avoid condemnation. And you want to avoid punishment at all costs. You never want to touch any of these things in your relationships. You do not have the chair that can afford to use any of these things. You don't get to accuse anyone. You've been forgiven of all the crazy that you've done, all the harmful things, all the selfish things, all the whatever. You've been forgiven. Jesus purchased your freedom. Okay? Because of that, you now don't get to accuse anybody else either. They've been set free as well. Okay? So when you tap into this thing and you use this to express yourself, to get your point across, to get them to behave, you're actually using what Satan does in order to get results in your life. And when you do that, the results that come will not be freedom. They will not be fulfilling or good. Okay? Condemnation, same thing. The judgment has been passed on you. You've been pardoned. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And I'm assuming all y'all watching this tonight are believers. If you're not, shoot me an email. You want to know Jesus. But all this stuff I'm talking about applies to people walking with the Lord who've been born again, right? You want to know Jesus. You want to be reborn and walking in the newness of life that God paid for on that cross. When that happens, these things become illegal. But they also get stripped out of your life. You don't have to feel them anymore. You don't have to deal with it. So there is no condemnation for those who have been born again in Jesus. Hallelujah. Okay, so we don't touch that. We don't put that on other people. We don't condemn them for what they did. We don't hold that against them. We don't keep them locked in some box where they're trapped being guilty. And then lastly, punishment. You guys, this is such an addicting, terrible, barbaric practice that I still see prevalent in our culture today. People have their justice system. Remember those judgments and expectations? People have their judgment and expectations set up, and some of them believe that if you violate what they have decided you're supposed to do or bring in a given circumstance or situation, that they're now allowed, they're legally permitted to punish you, whether it's emotionally or otherwise. And there's a lot of emotional punishment going on where people will literally cut themselves off from other people. They won't let them know them. They won't be intimate or vulnerable with them anymore until they fix their behavior, until they make that problem go away or whatever. That's called manipulation and punishment, and it's awful, and it comes from hell, and we don't want to do that, okay? I'm going to button this thing. It's driving me nuts. All right. So if at any point we are expressing negative emotion to someone we care about, we do not accuse them, we do not condemn them, we do not punish them. What do we do? The answer is love and trust. We love and trust them, and then all this stuff flares up. Well, what about, and all this scary, paranoid insecurity shows up, right? We'll get into this at the school, but you guys, just so you know, that's where this road goes, and only love gives us the power to follow through with that kind of thing, okay? So let me just check out some of your questions real quick before I move on from here. Question for later, where does hearing God and judgment fit in? How can you tell the difference? The judgment could be wrong or simply God telling you something. Yeah, so at the end of the day, you guys, truth is a spirit. Truth is a person. So truth is not based on facts or details or laws. Truth is based on the nature of God, and then the facts come and try and give a commentary or try and take notes on him, but they are not authoritative. Truth is superior to facts, right? And so at the end of the day, we develop a relationship with the person or the spirit of truth, and within that intimacy, the judgment is produced. So Paul, I hope I answer your question there. It's through your intimacy with the spirit of truth that judgment comes from. And when your judgment is based on his nature and how he chooses to look at things, to respond to things, that's when your emotions are going to thrive and beam and be incredible. And that's when your words and your contribution and your choices are going to minister to and serve and empower your environment and your relationships. It's beautiful. You guys, if you hold to my teachings and you really are my disciples, this is Jesus talking, right? Then you'll know the truth. Then you'll be intimately acquainted with the person of truth, and he will set you free. You won't need to succumb to this person's demands anymore. You won't need to pedal for their intimacy. You won't need to prove to them that you deserve their trust. All that stuff goes away. And then this connection thing is an expression of beautiful, interdependent, mutual choice. I want you in my life. I choose you. I respect you. I appreciate you. I love you. And it's all a willful gift offering, not a trading situation.
So you said you feel negative emotion when your expectations aren't being met. So what do you do with that? Is it always just changing your expectations or reconfiguring your judgments? If so, how do you do that practically?
Okay. So the question was like, how do you reframe your judgments or your expectations practically? Great question. So, it depends on the circumstance or the situation, right? So let me grab an example. Let's say I've got a friend who consistently talks badly about other people. They gossip, right? Let's say that's their deal. And let's say I've confronted them a couple times because I care about this person. We're building a relationship here. We're intimate. We're going places together, and it keeps happening. And I confront him like, hey, dude, I would love it if you didn't like talk badly about other people. I know that you don't, maybe you're not aware that it's happening, but there are times where I hear you saying these things, and it sucks to hear that. I don't want to know you think that about them. I don't want to know that about them, but I especially don't want to know that that's what you're thinking, right? And so let's say I've confronted this person a few times and they still don't do it. Then I'm going to shift my expectation of what this person is going to function like in the relationship because I've given them a chance. I've consistently, over several occasions, given them an opportunity to correct that behavior, to change the way they want to conduct themselves in that way. And if they continue to demonstrate they don't want to change it, they don't care, it's not important to them, then I'm going to shift my expectation. And when they gossip again, I'm not going to be shocked. I'm not going to be hurt. I'm not going to be offended. I'm going to be aware, like, I get it. That's where they're at. It's what they're doing. It's okay. I'm going to not expect them to be different, but I am going to choose to conduct myself in a certain way so that I don't have to come under the nonsense or the negative stuff that they're putting out. So I might just let them know, hey, next time you decide you want to like talk crap about other people, I get that you like to do it. And you know that I don't like it. I'm not going to tell you not to do it anymore. Like, I understand that this is a value you have and you're going to keep doing it. But the next time you do that, I'm going to remove myself in whatever way is appropriate. But I am going to demonstrate to you that I'm serious about this by my choices. The next time you're doing that, I'm going to pull over and get out of the car and wait till you're done. Whatever. You always have a choice. You always have the ability to choose in your environment, in your circumstances, okay? So that's called a boundary. A boundary without a consequence is not an actual boundary. If you guys want to know more about that, Boundaries by Charles Townsend and Henry Cloud, such a good book. Super helpful on talking about those mechanics. Hopefully that answers that question. We got to keep moving because we're running out of time. Some situations you cannot have confrontation with your boss or some bosses. Lindy, I would disagree. You absolutely can confront your boss. You want to be based on that relationship, right? They're a superior role in your life. You want to come in low. You want to do that anyway, but especially if someone has superiority over you because of the man structure you're in or whatever, I'm going to come in low. I'm going to be proposing. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to be very proposally in that exchange. It doesn't mean I can't confront it. It means the way I confront it needs to be through honor, through humility, through gentleness, through that kind of stuff, right? So you can still confront anybody. It's just the way you go about it needs to be respecting the nature of your relationship, okay? Okay, you guys, I got to wrap this up. Thanks for getting this far with me. All right, have a great rest of your night, you guys.